Since we don't have any power supply right now, we have to change our agenda a little bit. Our next speaker was supposed to join us online, so we moved her a bit later. And now I will invite our next presenter, Nataliia Maksymova. She has a very interesting presentation about a very important topic related to our children. So I hope you will enjoy this presentation. And another technical moment while we set in our equipment, we have a back door and you cannot use it. We will open it to get better ventilation without power supply. So we open the door, but please don't use it. Thank you. Nataliia, the floor is yours. Hello, everyone. So the mere fact that today the whole population of Ukraine is affected by the situation we all are aware about definitely affects not just adults but children as well. And this is the reason why we conducted a research focused on children specifically. So, in my presentation, I will first tell you a bit about stress. We've already heard a very exciting presentation about mice, but I will tell you about stress and stress-related disorders in humans. Then we will talk about neuropsychological aspects, which are very important for psychotherapy and treatment. Then we will talk about psychological trauma resulting from chronic stress, because when we talk about children, mostly it's about chronic stress, and we will talk about the impact of chronic stress on children development, and then I will share the results of an empiric research we conducted a month ago in early May among school children. I will tell you about methods, about results, and about some conclusions. So let's start with the concept of stress. First of all, everyone's so afraid of stress, everyone thinks it's such a scary thing, but actually Gansuye, who first introduced this concept, defined it as a response of an organism to a change of environment. It's not always something terrible, because our environment is changing, but an organism wants to maintain a homeostasis. So when something changes, we will stress. There are various levels of stress. For example, a person goes to an interview. Of course, it's stressful. Job interview is stressful. You may face some unexpected questions. You are being assessed. Or even this presentation at the conference is also a stressful situation. But when a person consciously faces the stress and expects everything to finish successfully, it's called eustress, it's positive stress. As one of my students once said, you need a little law of stress to stimulate your life. But unfortunately, some levels of stress may cause our body to respond. The level of anxiety increases, our body mobilizes. It's about threatening situation when you're facing a threat to your life, to your health, to your self-confidence, to your social status. And in this case, our body responds. Our body mobilizes itself, the feeling of anxiety increases, and then we reach a certain peak point, after which we either adapt, where we overcome this challenge, we know what to do next, and we resume our normal functioning with more experience and generally feel okay. But sometimes we face traumatic stress. In case it's something that happens when body cannot cope with the stress. The stressor is too overwhelming, and our psyche cannot cope with it. Selye defines it as a distress. So, distress is when we fail to cope with a challenge and disorganization, a breakdown happens. So, human body may respond to stress in a number of different ways. Here we will talk about stress resilience. Mr. Victor mentioned very interesting figures, 0.06. Of course, we have much more patients with PTSD in our country, but still the peaceful time research show interesting data because yes, indeed, stressful situations, disintegration, breakdowns normally result from disasters, road traffic accidents, natural disasters, man-made disasters. So according to our data, 20 people experiencing these kinds of events will develop PTSD, while other people will cope normally. So I'm just means that there are different types of stress resilience, and similar to resilient mice mentioned by Mr. Victor, some people may also successfully cope with the events. It depends on our nervous system, on our brain activities. We will talk about neuropsychological aspect in more detail. So, if a person has high stress resilience, normally such person successfully copes with this overwhelming load, and there are even some people prone to taking risks. Some people love taking risks. You know, all these parachute jumps. So people with high stress resilience love it. But some people may have average or even low stress resilience. So if for one person an exam is a terrible stress, just the regular university exam is a regular stress, while other people enjoy delivering public talks in front of a large audience. It feels nice and stimulating. And so, if we talk about war, if we talk about combat operations and hostilities, stress resilience depends not just on type of nervous system, but also on personality, on education. If about the parent role model in a situation of anxiety, in a situation of a failure, because small children observe our behavior and absorb it. So if a child is educated to cope with challenges, to be open to new developments, and the stress resilience will be higher. Values are also very important. A well-known phenomenon is that people who are defending their country normally have higher stress resilience than attacking party, aggressor party. When people understand why they're risking their health and life, they normally have higher stress resilience. So taking into account this phenomenon, we may also predict the effects of stress on a human being. And these stress resilience levels affect the behavior of people. I will show you an example. I had a master student's research paper, and my students measured how people affected by stressful situations. It was done, I think, in April 2022 and April 2024 in Kharkiv. This research was made in Kharkiv. A random sample. People waiting for a train in subway were surveyed, a brief survey about the stress levels. And so results showed that in 2022, around 80% of respondents had high levels of stress. They were worried, they were really stressed and really concerned. While in 2024, only 20% of respondents were affected by high stress, and the conclusion here is that our collective stress resilience increased So how it can be explained? Well, an alternative explanation is different. It was a random sample both in 2022 and 2024. The idea is that people with lower stress resilience have already left the country. So, because it's quite difficult to increase your stress resilience, and it should be taken into account. And then finally, stress and psychological trauma. Here, the mere fact when we measure the level of psychotrauma after stressful incidents, these methods can be quite different. First of all, we're talking about acute stress response. So something happens, potential dramatic events happen, such as shell fire or a missile strike. Acute stress response develops. A person may freeze, may get disoriented in time and space, may not respond to very simple questions like what is your name. People don't want to contact, people refuse, deny food, deny drinks. People may get hysterical, may start crying. This acute stress response normally lasts for 1-2 hours, up to 24 hours, and then people normally start to gradually recover. But if a person has low stress resilience, the stress disorder may develop. The stress disorder will have some signs and symptoms similar to PTSD: avoidance, hypervigilance, apathy, bad dreams, nightmares. And normally this stress disorder lasts for up to 1 month. There are different guidance, international classification of diseases. So if this condition continues up to 3 months, it's classified as a stress disorder. And only after 3 months, PTSD is diagnosed. Flashbacks, intrusions, cognitive decline, social disadaptation. Sometimes alcohol abuse and drug abuse as a form of self-medication, dementia as mentioned by previous presenter. So these time frames and stress responses are closely related to psychotrauma, and when the stress is prolonged, I think you have noticed, we count these times 24 hours, 3 days, 3 months after a potential traumatic event. But in Ukraine, regular civilians are living in a unique setting because the stress is continuous and prolonged. We always wait for air raid alarm sirens, constant distractions, constant losses. We don't have this period of recovery. Normally, the times are counted after the end of a potential traumatic incident. A person is already safe, but these responses continue. But unfortunately, our chronic stress has lasted for over 2 years now. So I am afraid the consequences and implications of this psychotrauma are going to be quite serious. And now let's talk about some neuropsychological aspects. Here I'm ready to argue a little bit with Mr. Victor. There are 3 functional structures in our brain. This one is an energy structure. This is information perception and processing structure, and this is programming, activity regulation, activity control structure. This third yellow structure is actually something which differentiates humans from animals. This is the reason why it works a bit different in mice, because mice don't have prefrontal cortex. Well, they do have it, but it doesn't have all these functions. This energy structure is the first red one. Here we have everything everything which contains this anxiety, these memories of anxiety, of stress response. So everything is stored there. Then information processes. Similar to mice, people perceive the information about what's going on, compare it with previous experience, and design a plan what to do next. And finally, the third structure is about self-regulation, emotional regulation primarily. People are capable of regulating their emotions, but only if this level of stress is moderate. So normally these structures work in harmony. We can quickly process information about changes in our environment, send the signals to our prefrontal cortex, regulate our emotions, regulate our conditions, everything's fine. But if this level of stress is overwhelming, this energy structure starts to control all the functions. Everything related to information processing, goal setting, values, self-regulations, everything done by a person goes literally wrong. So this energy structure where our emotions are concentrated starts to disrupt all this very complex integrated brain activity. And then, unfortunately, all these psychotrauma symptoms develop. Now, excuse me. Now let's talk a little bit about this energy unit, energy structure. It doesn't mean it's only about energy. This structure is responsible for our emotions. It's called an ancient brain or reptile brain, brainstem, hippocamp, and amygdala. Maybe you've heard about amygdala. There we store our memories of fear, anxiety, stress response. It's called ancient or reptile brain because most animals have it, including mice. And if you remember from your school biology course, a human embryo is a little bit similar to reptile, and it already has it. Its first nervous tubes that developed during the very first day of embryo formation. And it's so important because it's basically a result of the entire evolutionary process. And when this amygdala is overexcited, it can disrupt the whole psychological self-regulation process. There are several interesting research, neuropsychological research. So if a person is often exposed to stress, this amygdala dilates, expands inside, while hippocamp, responsible for relaxation and decompression, shrinks. Just imagine how serious these stressful situations are. They are so serious that they can even affect our brain anatomy. These are very exciting research, I think. Sorry, how can I go to the next slide? Where to click? Oh. Okay, now it works. So this is research by B.D. Perry. These are MRI images of a 3-year-old children. One child was raised in a normal environment and another child was unfortunately raised in a very negative environment of extreme neglect. You see different MRI images. Here we have more nervous connections and associations. They are more harmonic, more flexible, more balanced and resilient. And this child was raised in conditions of extreme neglect, exposed to abuse. Basic needs were not met. Basically, poor social environment. Parents were deprived of parental rights, were deprived of custody. Unfortunately, this child was constantly exposed to this chronic stress. And you see these changes in the brain as compared to normal healthy child. So a conclusion here is that children affected by stress now may have very serious implications, and take into account the fact that child brain is yet under development, it's yet very vulnerable, the consequences may be quite complicated. Oh, doesn't work again? Yeah, I'm pressing this button. Could you please help me with my slides? Okay, so let's talk about the chronic stress consequences. First of all, these are cognitive consequences. Children don't want to learn anything new. Very similar to mice, actually, as you remember from the first presentation. And so this learning motivation, which is actually very valuable. Children are normally curious to learn something about some, I don't know, chemical reactions, about why the wind is blowing. They lose this interest. The cognitive needs are ignored. Memory, attention are always affected, and the academic performance is much worse in stress-affected children. Many teachers notice it over the course of the last 2 years, and here 2 years of COVID pandemic, which was also stressful because children heard this conversation between adults. So unfortunately, cognitive functions are affected. Then emotional functions. It means that children really feel a lot of fear, anxiety, irritation. They are emotionally unstable. They are often prone to conflict, prone to fighting. And when they start to fight, they often start to fight because of some minor, really unimportant things, just getting crazy. And all these emotional disorders, unfortunately, are very common. They're crying, they're shouting. Then we have physiological consequences, sleep disorders, issues with nutrition, issues with digestion, feeling of cold, feeling of heat, trembling, nausea. So physiological manifestations and unfortunately behavioral manifestations. What I mentioned, destructive behavior, motor disinhibition in many children. Most previously it was often diagnosed as ADHD, but now it's not like 1 or 2 children per group. It's many children affected by it, and these behavioral disorders result in an ability to keep distance with a teacher, some deviant behavior. It's also quite typical. And then finally, let's talk about next slide, please. No, previous slide. That's too far. Okay, now unfortunately, development pathologies develop right now in our children, because everything starts with this social psychological factors, stress, and sometimes they are biological nature, but in our case they are social and psychological. Then a child develops behavioral issues with learning, adaptation, communication. This results in a negative response by teachers, by educators, by parents, because many adults do not realize it. It's very good to have this training program. It's because many parents don't understand that their kids are living in a totally different environment. It's important to stabilize the child's condition, but there is a lack or inefficiency of such methods. So there is a negative response by environment, which increases anxiety, worry, results in development of negative compensatory strategies, and then the cycle reiterates itself. Unfortunately, this situation is very typical for our society right now. And next, let me tell you about some empirical data. We have conducted empirical research at Kyiv schools and to find our normative control group. We struggle to find normative control group because the refugee children abroad are also facing these issues. They often experience loss of home, loss of grandparents. It's not a normal control group. Then adaptation issues, cultural shock. So we asked our colleagues from Canada to provide a control group for us, control sample. So we worked with this 8th grade and 9th grade student. We offered them a survey to assess the levels of chronic stress in children. So we wanted to assess how the children behaved, felt themselves over the course of the last 2 months. We wanted to assess the manifestations of the stress disorders and the severity of the stress experiences. We developed this survey, this instrument ourselves, because there are a lot of stress inventories for adults, but they are often negative in nature. I have bad dreams, I feel digestion disorders, I feel anxious. When we did pilot study, children asked why your survey is so pessimistic. So we basically changed the inventory a little bit and we made it shorter, because normally such inventories can include 30 to 50 questions. We had only 16 questions, and children completed this survey. Then we also used projective method, a composition, my day after 5 years. We used it in order to assess how this chronic stress is connected to the vision of future. We did it in May this year. Okay, next slide, please. Here we go. So this is our survey, a preamble. We explained that it was scientific research. The children didn't have any concerns about answering in the wrong way, that the results would be generalized. The instruction is very detailed because we had a whole research team who conducted it, so we provided very detailed instruction to make sure that everything is done in a uniform manner. This is our set of questions. The first 4 questions are about cognitive domain, 4 questions about emotional domain, then behavioral domain, and the last 4 questions about physiological somatic domain. We were reading the statements aloud, and the children were supposed to fill this form. How often over the course of the last 2 months you felt happy, cheerful, or had issues concentrating? So we mixed positive and negative answers together, and they were supposed to respond it. And then we processed the results. This is a comparison of stress level between Kyiv and Canada. A blue bar is high stress, red is average stress, and gray is low stress. So here we have a first number of students and percentage experiencing the corresponding level of stress. And here is, you see, these results almost mirror each other. In Kyiv we have 40% of students experiencing high stress, even more students experiencing average stress, and a low number of kids experiencing low stress. If we compare it with our Canadian control group, the results are quite positive. Very low number of kids with high level of stress, just 11 or 10%. A bit more kids with average level of stress, which is quite natural for teenagers, while most kids have low level of stress experiences. So unfortunately, our kids are indeed affected by this very serious situation. Next is a vision of future. Here, this is a composition by a 8th grader. Pay attention to the spelling, to handwriting, and to content. So the topic was, so we did similar my day in 5 years. Research before COVID, and the risk behavioral response to this task was quite obvious. Back then, before COVID, children were inspired. They enjoyed writing these compositions. We had the whole pages about future education, leisure time, about dreams and ambition, studying new languages, learning new skills like riding a bicycle or swimming. They described various domains of their lives. They enjoyed imagining their future. It was obvious from their behaviors that they enjoyed this task, but this time everything was quite different. There was a lot of confusion, a lot of irritation, laughter, but a bit hysterical laughter. So children responded to this task in a bit traumatic way. It was obvious. But then when we analyzed their compositions, first of all, you see it's very brief, just a few sentences. And then, so we did our test on Tuesday, on a weekday. So in Tuesday, I will be studying at a college abroad. I will drink coffee because I want to live and not to survive amidst the war. Also, I really love my country. So around 60% of kids wrote that they wanted to leave Ukraine. There's another example. I don't see my future. I don't have a future. 9th grader. You see decreased level of knowledge, and these are quite normal Kyiv schools. Kyiv district, Solomensky district, Shevchenkivsky district. It's not like some rural area without qualified educators. So this phrase, I don't see future, it was quite difficult. Some children just gave us empty sheets and some draw pictures. Something like this. I will wake up in a coffin. I will be killed during war. Some very sad and very negative things. So, unfortunately, the situation with child development right now is badly affected by this chronic stress, and it's very, very serious. And so, some conclusions and recommendations. First of all, we definitely need to raise awareness. We need parents to understand what's going on with their children, because they don't understand it. They think their kids are just behave badly. They try to push them, they try to change their behavior, but the kids needs totally different approach. So we need to educate parents on how to properly communicate with their children in light of current situation. And we also need professionals. I actually represent the Kyiv Institute of Modern Psychology and Psychotherapy. Right now, we are about to launch an educational program, mental health support psychology. It's exactly about what I'm talking about. You see, there is a list of disciplines. Here we have mental health and psychological well-being. Then we have theory and practice of consulting, psychology of addictive behavior. Unfortunately, it's also very typical. Then we have psychology of trauma, another very interesting course. Diagnostics and treatment of mental health disorders, first psychological first aid. So this course is excellent to prepare professionals who will be helping both children and adults to recover after this situation, to cope with post-traumatic stress disorders. Actually, someone mentioned something about post-traumatic growth. Yes, it indeed happens, but that happens rarely without therapeutic influence, but a proper therapy can increase significantly a chance for post-traumatic growth. And this program is also interesting in the sense that it will be running remotely. Don't mix it with online. So remote program means that we have already recorded a number of training sessions. We share these materials, and so you can really manage your time to watch it. For example, you are required to listen to 2 lectures during a week, so you can choose time when you have power supply, because obviously you can't watch lectures without power supply, so you can really manage your time. This course also includes practical tasks, several sessions with a professor. I think it's very interesting and useful topic, useful course. It will be launched next year, and right now at our institute we have another program. Sorry? We have another program. Another program, clinical psychology for master students. Unfortunately, we don't have it for bachelors. You need a bachelor degree to apply to it. And we also have a PhD course. And as for clinical psychology, right now we also have several very useful courses which enable professional treatment of post-traumatic stress disorders and, most importantly, prevention of PTSD. Because we're talking about children, I always emphasize this phrase, chronic stress. Of course, some children survived occupation, some children are refugees, they were forced to leave their homes and evacuate. Of course, they're severely traumatized. But even those children who have stayed in Kyiv for the whole time and experienced all these events are affected by chronic stress. And unfortunately, the effects of chronic stress are very similar to traumatic stress caused by serious events. These are contact details of our university. You can take a picture. And please come, we will be happy to welcome you and to train more professionals. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you, Nataliia. Do you have any questions for Nataliia?